Welcome back to another episode of Titans of Now. Titans is a showcase of ServiceNow personalities that have punched above their weight and elevated the ServiceNow community. Titans of Now is brought to you by me, Robert the Duke Fedoric. If you want to see what I'm up to, check out my website, theduke.digital. Here you'll find all my CJ and the Duke episodes, links to my YouTube content, and my upcoming course, Hired, the definitive guide to profiles that win ServiceNow jobs. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Titans of ServiceNow. It is so good to have you here. Today we are talking to one of the most recognized names in ServiceNow training. I know of nobody outside of ServiceNow who's trained more people in our space. He's an elite member of the GlideFast team and the fifth GlideFast member to the Titans Pantheon. I am so happy to introduce you to Alex GlideFast Darby. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Robert. It's a pleasure to be on. It's just truly an honor to be recognized as a Titan, not only for training, but also for GlideFast. As you mentioned, we do have quite a few. I just really appreciate being on and getting to hang out and talk.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure to have you here, man. So every episode we start at the start. How did you start in ServiceNow?
So I started in ServiceNow, probably like a lot of people did. I was actually didn't know about it, right? And I worked for a division of eBay called eBay Enterprise, and we were deciding on our next ticketing system, as they were called in those days. So ServiceNow came to do a demo, right, to show us what it was about. And the very first time that I saw how easy it was to add a field to the UI, also to the database within the same motion, took seconds. I immediately fell in love. And then literally that night, so I live in Pennsylvania, I just looked online what jobs are available for ServiceNow in Pennsylvania, and trainer came up. And I'd done a couple trainings. I was involved with the former ITSM solution that was at eBay Enterprise. So I'd done some trainings for users and things like that, but nothing to like technical developers. So I applied for that, ran through about 6 or 7 interviews. And finally, a gentleman named Fayez hired me into the training department at ServiceNow, where I immediately started learning about this sort of the platform. It was called the sysadmin class at the time, but then became ServiceNow fundamentals, and then went on my path from there and just tried to learn about as many different pieces of the platform, many different classes to be certified in. And then at that time, we actually still traveled around the world. So I went to places like China, I went to France, all across America, training people in person. I know, it's pretty strange. But then once that got a little bit old, which is weird to say now, I started making my own books, right? I started building out the discovery platform book and then also the event management book, and became a curriculum developer, which was pretty cool because I didn't have any ITOM experience. And one of my bosses at the time, Andy Ho, he was like, hey, you want to be a curriculum developer so you don't have to travel as much? Yes, that would be great. How about discovery? I was like, what's discovery?
Let us discover what it is.
Yeah, exactly. And he was like, well, can you learn? I was like, sure, I can learn. So he had a whole bunch of faith in me, and I learned discovery and traveled around, talked to some of the experts like Glenn Pinto, Doug Schultze, Ryan Zuley, things like that at the time. Learned it, and then that became my passion, was following along and writing curriculum development, until I met a gentleman named Michael Lombardo. I guess it was like Knowledge 14, 15, somewhere in that range. At the time, he was actually helping me. He was a teaching assistant at one of those knowledge rooms, and we were doing PPM. So it was a class I'd already learned before I started getting into ITOM. And we're teaching a class. It's a room like 60 people. And then we got to know each other that way. And then over the next 4 years, we just kept in contact. And he, told me about his plans to start a new company and how that was going to work. And I was like, are you crazy? You have kids. What are you doing? Take the paycheck. And then finally, at some point, GlideFast became large enough to where a training department made sense. And so he reached out to me and said, hey, do you want to build a department here? And I said, yes. That all happened about 3 years ago. I've been exposed to all parts of the platform, written training for basically every kind of role, every kind of user, whether that's the hardcore developer or the person who's going through the service portal. It's been a crazy journey. Reported to a lot of people, like 2 Titans.
Who's the second Titan?
Well, Andy Ho and Mike Lombardo.
Oh, Mike Lombardo, right.
Yeah. So he was my direct boss for a little while. Now we've got more structure and more layers in between us now. But still, if he has an idea, he'll call me, hey, Darby, you can do this, or can we do that? And we've really just expanded the department into something that is pretty crazy now. It's actually hard to keep track of all the different things we do. whether that's taking a person quite literally off the street of Cincinnati
Mm-hmm.
and training them to be a developer. Or I got the certified master architect. In order to be a part of that program, you have to take the app dev fundamentals class. So people like 10 years, 11 years come into the class to get their certification, where I'm teaching them kind of new stuff about Flow Designer and how to script in Flow Designer and that kind of stuff. So it's really just the spectrum is crazy. And then what you have to do to teach individual users, really what I've learned over time. So it's been fantastic. I've done some implementations, but most of the time for the last 8 years, it's literally been just training in all these different facets. And it's just great that the interest is there. And of course, the money to be able to keep the training program running.
I want to talk just for a second about the meteoric rise of GlideFast. Like, I just remember at One Knowledge, I saw Mike and he was there with Lloyd and he's like, hey man, you want to come to the GlideFast party? I'm like, sure, how many are there? It's just us. And so it was Mike, Lloyd, and I, and some strangers who might not have even been there for the ServiceNow conference. It was just Vegas, and we just grabbed a bus somewhere. It was pretty hilarious. And then it's like, you get busy with life, and then a couple of years later, it's, oh, GlideFast got the Partner of the Year award that one year. Wait, how many 100 people do they have? This is insane.
Yeah, that Partner of the Year award, none of us were expecting that. So there was no prep time for Mike, right? Mike woke up one morning, and then they said, out of nowhere, you're winning this award. So we had to get to wherever the award was, make his speech. And then I think we carried around the skateboard the whole next day.
Right.
That was definitely one of the hugest highlights. But I like to compare the rise of GlideFast by hotels, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like me. So my first year in ServiceNow is only in ServiceNow for 3 weeks, and we're going to Knowledge. The entire training team for ServiceNow goes to Knowledge because we got to train those big classes and everything. But I'm here 3 weeks, so I don't know what's going on. So they stick me in to be some type of training assistant somewhere. But because I was so new, they also didn't include me on the list of people to go into the hotel. And this was the San Francisco one. So I don't have any idea like how expenses work or that was all supposed to be taken care of. So I'm just told to be in San Francisco for those dates. So I get a hotel room in the Tenderloin district.
Yep.
You know that. Okay. So I literally picked the Tenderloin district because Tenderloin sounds like a fancy piece of steak.
Yeah.
Wrong.
Nope.
Wrong. So I rent this like cheap hotel room, and I'm like, this can't be the way corporate America works. And I mean, there's like kind of a homeless problem there, like aggressive homeless people. As soon as I come out of the building, like asking me for money, I'm like, this is just not right. So that's the way my ServiceNow career started. I get to the center and I meet with my bosses for the first time. And I was like, yeah, it's really weird, my hotel. I'm like, well, where are you staying? I was like, well, it's this hotel. And they said, well, that's not one of the options. I said, oh, well, you just told me to be here. So they're like, oh my God, you're in the Tenderloin district. So it became this big joke. And then the last hotel that I stayed in was with GlideFast at the last Knowledge. We had a basketball hoop in the hotel room. So it was like I've gone from basically the ghetto, sort of area of San Francisco hotel type to where maybe LeBron James would stay if he was in town for Knowledge. A couple of things that really make GlideFast have a meteoric change is experts are hired. They're not afraid to spend money to get people that know ServiceNow backwards and forwards, and they're part of the, I call it the ServiceNow cult, right? Where they love it. There's literally people who just love doing ServiceNow. Plus Lombardo's, his personality, the man, he's like the company's personality, right? Kind of follows along with him with LFG, his catchphrase and things like that. But a couple of policies are really the promotion from within. There's very few of the C-suite or vice presidents or me as a director that didn't actually do some type of development work before. And then they worked at the company and they promote within. So when our job offerings go out, they go out internally, like on the internal Slack channel, and then people apply for them. And we've always promoted that way. So it keeps it in-house, and really people love that. And there's, to my knowledge, Mike might disagree with this, but there's basically like an unlimited training budget. So anybody can take any training that they want. I facilitate it for them, whether that's through me, through ServiceNow or whatever. In the 3 years that I've been there, I've never had him say no to anything. Now, of course, I've had them say, well, we need to make a little bit more money on training. That's a constant struggle. But in addition to the promotion within, also our training department. I mean, it's a groundbreaking training department for this size company. We're over 300 people, but still like we can have similar training departments to the larger like Accentures and things like that. And that's really his devotion to not only me, but also just training in general. It's been really neat. So I think promotion within, having a training department, hiring experts, and then just unrelenting support for our clients. That's pretty much how I'd explain the rise of GlideFast.
Every partner has their advantages and the things they lean into, but the one thing that keeps on coming up with GlideFast is the GlideFast University and their internal training programs. Can you tell us a little bit more about GlideFast University?
Yeah, absolutely. GlideFast merged with another partner called CloudPires, and CloudPires really acted as I like to think of it as a teaching hospital where you have a senior TC that's on, but there's a junior TC that's involved as well. So really their whole mentality was teaching, that they would take one or two brand new people. Maybe they have a little bit of computer experience. Maybe they have a degree, maybe not, but they understand technology. They have a passion and interest in it. And then they did well in multiple interviews. So we have a pretty stringent interview process where we put people through logic puzzles and things like that in order to find out, can this person solve problems? Can they put together the tools and solve the problem? So once CloudPires merged with GlideFast, we took that idea and just put it on steroids, right? So we did 15 people all at the same time starting in July. No degree or anything, right? You just had to have a little bit of knowledge of computers and desire, and then show that you can solve problems through a multiple interview process. And then the difference is that we hire these people. So while they're in training, they actually have a job. It's not something that they go and pay for or anything like that. So we're giving them this really great opportunity. And then we start using as much free stuff as possible, honestly, man. Like we use the Chuck Tomasi video series. We use the developer training that's on the developer site. And then we take that content and flip it back to where it becomes requirements. So we're putting these people into real world scenarios where literally like I act as the client, I get angry at them, or I become the classic, I want you to do this even though it's not best practice. I do that so they learn how to handle clients who are a little bit maybe confused on how ServiceNow works, but then also clients who know what they want. They are seasoned, all the different exposures we have, because the ServiceNow training is great, but you really got to combine that with this is how it exists in the real world.
What makes like a truly excellent training program for you?
For me, it's investment, right? Investment from the organization to have dedicated trainers. If you have dedicated trainers, you can pivot, you can do things, right? But that means that your C-suite, whatever in your organization, has to make that commitment, especially when you come to a consultancy firm, right? The people are the product. So if your people aren't producing income, right, that's something the rest of the business has to account for. So dedicated trainers who are specifically there for the entire length of the program. A lot of other folks will have a trainer come for fundamentals. Then you'll have a different trainer come for scripting, and then a different trainer come for app dev. What we do is have a consistent trainer throughout the whole time that can help challenge students, go with them at their own pace, but then also have a different trainer come in for each of those that's an expert in those areas. But really that consistency is what provide them with somebody to go to all the time who is actively working with them on their specific knowledge that they've gained. Another thing is the hiring, right? Make it their job. I've helped vets before. I've worked with the Next Gen program at ServiceNow to teach underserved communities. And the one thing that sort of causes people to fail or to not do well in those programs is it's not their job. So they're not really committed to the level that you need to be in order to learn ServiceNow in a short amount of time, which is a difficult task. So the fact that we hire them and then also have a dedicated trainer really makes up for almost anything else. If you have somebody dedicated, you can shift and pivot, change your training there. And then lastly, it's the mock requirements, right? The mock implementations that we do. It's really, we start with what we call an internal product transfer knowledge, right? Which is like our sales team transferring to the delivery team. We start with that. We go through an SOW, all fake, of course. We go through the timeline. Then they do a workshop where they demo the out-of-box functionality, and then we come in and make them develop the requirements that we give them to as a client would, like verbally during a demo or during a workshop. So really those three things, us hiring them, us having dedicated trainers, which is a commitment from our leadership, and then also making the training like a job, basically.
That is such a stark contrast to that nightmare story that we've all heard in the space of that staffing agency that did the academy. And
yeah, you loved them, man.
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's just, you ever hear that saying, like, your sole purpose in life might be to serve as an example to others?
Yeah,
of like
definitely.
how bad it can go wrong. And for those of you who don't know this story, there was this staffing agency that brought a lot of veterans in and trained them in ServiceNow, and then right out the gate, let's build them out at a super high rate. And nobody was hiring these guys because the rate was too high for beginners. And they forced these dudes not to work. So they couldn't go get another job without violating non-compete. And they couldn't get paid because they weren't billable. Yeah, so these dudes were like trapped, not able to work. Some of them paid 15 grand just to get out of their contracts. Insanity.
Yeah, they were like 2-year contracts or something like that. It was pretty insane. And that the good that came out of that was that ServiceNow now runs that program, right? They take the vets and they do it off of, it's SkillBridge, right? Where the Department of Defense pays for them to be able to learn a new trade or new whatever to be able to exist outside of the military. But ever since ServiceNow took it over, right, you have ServiceNow who's really out for the people in the program. Like when I meet with them and I'll teach a class or two for them, and it is remote, but they've been successful, but they're like the driving force is hired. Are they hired? Not are we making money off of them? ServiceNow like allocates all this money and they don't get charged, right? I mean, they're getting paid by the Department of Defense, but provides them all this training at no fee, pays me, even out of their pocket, which, of course, is a little bit deep, but it's been successful. The last 5 I did, all of them got jobs, which was pretty crazy. After their program's 16 weeks, so a little bit longer. But the success that she's had after that program, with the ones who shall remain nameless, has been just truly one of the most gratifying things. Because through those programs, we teach the veterans to be vocal on LinkedIn. Some of them have been with you describing how it's changed their life. And that for me is the passion in the job, is when you get an email from somebody you see on LinkedIn, hey, really thank you, Alex Darby, for blah, blah, blah. Thank you, whoever, for your work. And same thing happens with you, man. Like when you see that, you're just like, like that's a W for me. So that's pretty cool.
I want you to tell me about a time when you didn't think you were going to make it, where the odds were against you, your back was against the wall, but it was only down to you.
So let's see. No, my very first training at the time, ServiceNow was nowhere near this big, but the training team was just getting billable and all that kind of stuff. So Fayez had hired 4 of us at the same time, which was the largest bulk of hiring all at the same time, and said, hey, you guys have 12 weeks to learn, your first ServiceNow class and then be able to teach it. I was like, great, that'll give me plenty of time. And then about 6 weeks into it, he's like, hey, I know this is kind of quick, but do you think you could teach a class on ServiceNow fundamentals? And I was like, sure, when? He's like, Thursday. It's Monday. And I was like, you really want to come through for the team. You want to do something that's pretty fantastic. And so I said, sure. And he goes, this is another caveat. It's in the Philippines. So it was in the middle of it's virtual. It was in the middle of the night. And I'm just like cramming. I just couldn't get into my brain for the whole 3-day class. And I really thought there was like a time I was like, I just got to call him and tell him I can't do this. I'm not going to be able to pull it off, but it all went off fine and smooth. And, of course I had some hiccups as I went through, but getting through that first one in the middle of the night, that was pretty difficult. And then the first time that I started at GlideFast, it really wasn't about the ServiceNow. It was about how do you make training successful? You know what I mean? Because I'm coming in and Mike, obviously hired me for my training capability, intelligence, all that kind of stuff. But I didn't know anything about finances, right? Like every time I'd be on with the CFO or Mike or whatever, and they'd start throwing out words like gross margin and stuff, I'm Googling the stuff as I go through. And I'm just like, man, I am not going to be able to do it. I mean, now I understand all the terminology. It's been 3 years and everything, and I've got it down. But still, that billable part of training had been a struggle where at some points, I'm just like, really didn't do well this month or do well the other month. But it's never been the quality. It's always been, all right, how do I put this in front of a client to where they can consume it, understand what they're getting, and then also think it's valuable enough to put into a SOW or a contract. And we really achieved that with the help of our pre-sales team. There's a guy named Paul Group who really helped out when building out our training offering. We just have line items that just say, for this app, if you want to train your users, it's this amount of money. And then we work it out with the client because, you've seen SOWs before for implementation. They're huge, right? They'll have all these different things in it. So the client gets a little bit exhausted through going through that process. And then when it came time to discuss training, if you have a whole lot of detail there, they're like, no, thanks, right? They're just, I don't want to even deal. Let's figure this part out and we'll come back to training. And then it becomes this emergency at the end. So we figured out to make it simple, approachable, and then a fixed fee. That way they get what they want. And then I have to figure out, the hours that have been in between it. So those were the two times that definitely made me sweat the most for sure, man.
And on the flip side of that, what do you think is your biggest W in the space?
Ooh, biggest W. Well, it's still a work in progress, right? But what we call the technical consultant program, or internally the junior dev program. This makes our associate TCs that's running in Cincinnati figuring out how to, first off, train all these people at the same time. We like to get them certified, figuring out what's the difference between certification knowledge and actual real world knowledge, and trying to balancing those two out. But then introducing these 15 new people into an environment of experts. It's like taking all these people who have this knowledge that we're saying, this should be able to contribute, but there's no substitute for experience. And so that's what's happening right now. Literally this month is getting those people in there, and it's been working. So that unknown of trying to get our associate TCs into the workforce, I'd never done that before. I've never, especially not with 15 people who were already paid and already had reports going on them and everything like that. So that's starting to happen this month. It's really coming together where the rest of the organization's seeing the value of them. That by far is the biggest achievement because, it's always been, I teach a class and I have 5, 10, 15 people, and maybe 4 or 5 you get some type of reward from that are like, wow, thank you. This is really helping me with my career. And it switched from that to 15 people that I'm responsible for that need this knowledge, that I need to have them produce, right? 100% of them, hopefully. That's what we're going for, to where it's my responsibility and their lives are a little bit in my hand. They've made this commitment. Some of them moved to Cincinnati for a little while just so they could join the program. And the fact that that's working out and they're actually passing certifications, they're happy, they love the culture, and they're actually going to be billable resources relatively soon for us has just been amazing.
All right, so it sounds like you've trained like a ton of stuff, like going from just ITSM world to, hey, learn about discovery and then build a training course around that. That's a pretty tall order. So what's your favorite thing to train?
I would say my favorite thing to train overall is discovery. Discovery for me, that was the one thing that stood out as where I didn't have to force myself to learn. It was always this new thing to approach, right? Because of just generally what it does, right? Remember that Nebula company that was service mapping? So when I first started with Discovery, service mapping was just introduced. It was called Service Watch because it was a bolt-on from that Nebula company out in Israel that ServiceNow just bought. And ServiceNow literally bolted it on. And my first day, right, was to fly to San Diego to see, all right, how do you use service mapping and how does it work? And it was terrible, man. I don't know if you,
I remember, I remember it. It just seemed like everybody who was trying to deploy it was like, what is this? How do I do it? And it seemed like they had these poor guys from Israel, like,
yeah, and they're
flying all over the world,
hours away, right? Like, so you even just scheduling a meeting was difficult, and then trying to figure it out. I mean, I'm not sure what this actual date range was, but I think it was literally like a year and a half or 2 years before we had one that was working in all of ServiceNow. And that was actually the most fearful time I had for ServiceNow, that it was going to turn into this company that bought things and just bolted them on, like everybody else does. But over time, they learned it and actually incorporated it in, and we have the pattern designer and everything now. So that all got worked out right as soon as I started writing the discovery class. So the switch from probes to patterns was at least happening from a ServiceNow perspective. Now that, of course, continues to happen this day to day. So not only do I get to figure out I work in ServiceNow, I can develop in ServiceNow, but I'm learning about Windows servers. I'm learning about Linux servers because you got to discover those things and you got to query them to be able to get them back. So it forced me to learn about other technologies because I'm not a natural guy who just goes and, a lot of friends of yours and mine will just go read about technologies. They love it. I have to be part of my job for me to learn it. So I was doing that. Plus I'm learning this pattern designer at the same time, which was like cutting edge technology for the world at that particular time. So all of those things combined, and then it just naturally clicked with me. So when I train it, I'm not even really trying. I'm just talking about cool things that I actually like. So that's my favorite thing to do in ServiceNow as of now. I also am starting to like Flow Designer. I know that's a little blasphemous for everybody else, but the ability to create actions and things like that and call them client side or call them server side, I really think is going to limit, the low code, no code approach. I can see it for the first time actually starting to work in ServiceNow. So that really excites me too.
A lot of different trainers have a unique style, and I wonder if you could articulate what your style is in training. How do you run a ship?
So I generally have a three-part approach, which is what I've learned over the years from different bosses like Andy Ho, Fayez Ahmed, Jeremy Robb, Josh Personius, Glenn Pinto. Like all these guys have all these different approaches. And really, the first thing is you instruct them on what you want them to learn. This is the step-by-step approach, which is the lecture from the teacher and then the step-by-step labs that come through it. So that is the first piece of training. But as you'll find, as anybody's find, when you do the step-by-step labs, at the end of it, you can't remember what you were doing in the first place, right? Because it's a different part of your brain that gets activated. It's like, okay, I know what the next step is. I don't have to consider what I'm doing. The entire process is provided for me. So your brain doesn't go, I'm solving a problem. It goes, I'm following instructions. So at that point, right, then the next level of training, you take those step-by-step instructions and then you write them in the form of a requirement. So this is a delivered requirement. It's perfectly sculpted by the business process consultant, and you follow that to where you're applying what you've learned to a fixing of a problem. So the fixing of the problem, and that's a completely different learning strategy, a completely different way for your brain to react, but it's closer to what the actual job is going to be. So therefore you're learning in the process of the job. Then the last piece is to just completely apply that to a real world scenario. So at this point, you've done the step-by-step, right? So that helps with guiding you through navigation. It helps with vocabulary. I mean, sometimes that's all you need to know to be able to solve a problem is what are the things called. So that takes care of that. Then the requirement gives you a little taste of, okay, you don't have step-by-step anymore. How do you solve this using the information that you were provided? And you don't really even need new content. You can literally take those step-by-step labs and just flip them into requirements with no step-by-step, just a basic instruction. And then the learning becomes more memorable, right? It stays in the brain. It's sticky, as I like to call it a little bit better. Then you take all that away. You take all their learning resources away. They're on their own and you give them the task, right? Which is to do a project on your own. Do the workshop, gather the requirements. We'll do like a video recording and then have the same person do the workshops, create their own requirements, then implement whatever they think them to be. And then once they demo whatever they've built, then the client changes the requirements or focus actually can kind of see, as you know, with clients like, or with anybody, a written down requirement is nowhere near as valuable as actually seeing that developed. And then you can respond with your eyes and your brain a little bit better. So you do that, right? They record that, they take down any changes into the requirements, and then they keep on demoing all the way through UAT. And then I'll act like a UAT person. So it's really, you instruct them, then you challenge them with prefab requirements, and then you make them work. So those three approaches really have been what's great for me. And these things can be done remotely. It's just nowhere near as effective. And sometimes that's the only option you have, right? Just for pure cost. So on-site for sure has been great. And then entertaining, right? The one thing about all of my trainings and everything that I try to do is voice inflection, right? Energy. And that's really how I hire my new trainers, which as a matter of fact, man, like you talk about the junior developer program, my trainers that come in, they just basically have to be users in ServiceNow, and then they become experts at being users. They don't need any development knowledge to do a end user training or a process user training. So they're all just people. Like one trainer that I have is what he calls a vocalist, right? He performs on the weekends, goes to shows and gets paid as a performer. Then his brother also works there. He's in drama, right? Goes and does plays. So I'm looking for these guys that have, and girls, excuse me, that have these big voices, right? That have this energy. And when you're trying to do an hour training with 600 users or 300 users to adopt ServiceNow, that's probably the most important thing. They may forget everything else. They may not, that may be just a little piece of that is their actual job, but they walk away with this excited feeling about ServiceNow because it was entertaining. We do this thing called dad jokes where we'll throw in a joke or two just to get them laughing. And then interaction, ask a question, get them a response, the call and response. So all of that, right? The instruction, the step-by-step, the then requirements, then in the real world. But this whole time, make it enjoyable for them by making it a lighter atmosphere, throwing out a couple of jokes, while you're playing the client or going down some ridiculous path to make them laugh or something like that. And I do that with every training to this day, which is how most people in the ecosystem know me, which is pretty cool because it's literally like one-on-one, like I'm with 16 different people every week or every other week. And then those 16 people talk to other people. And the real thing that's made my actual training pretty unique is the constant feedback circle that it is. So let's take application development fundamentals, right? I go into that class and I have no idea what we're going to build. And we'll build something on the fly that the students choose, right? Last time it was like a pig lifecycle management app. It's been something serious like an IP address management app. Things like that, but we do it all on the fly so we can see the mistakes that happen. The mistakes in training, whether they're scripted by me or they actually happen, by far way better than anything that works. So I drive to mistakes and then I follow up with the students afterwards, right? The whole GlideFast methodology of training is that it evolves every single time. So 3 weeks later after a discovery training, someone will email me and say, how do I discover these IP-based phones or whatever? And I'll answer that question. We'll figure it out together. Then the next class has that as an example in it. And so I just always am constantly rotating in the questions that I get from the field and then putting them into the training. And then people resonate with that and they go, oh, that's exactly what I have to do. I'm like, yeah, I know, because that's the new trend that I just heard from George about, my former student from a year ago or 2 years ago. So it's this constant cycle of real world coming back in that really makes the training more beneficial for everybody because it's constantly updated with new real world examples.
All right, Alex, we are at time. I want to thank you again for joining the show. For those of you watching, we'll have links for how to get in contact with Alex into the short description. Thanks again for being here, Alex. Really appreciate it.
It's been an honor, man. It's just so great. You sit and you look at the rest of the Titans that are in here, and just to be mentioned in the same breath of them just really just put some validation on what I've been doing. And I just really appreciate you. I learned a lot from you originally. When I first started, I would read what you put on the community and try to solve the problems that you were solving for other people. But you also did the same thing, man. You had like this real world approach when you were talking to people on the community, and then you're just truthy, honest way really helped me to say, you know what, I can be myself when it comes to doing training. I can be my own personality. And it was literally when I first started, that's what gave me my path was your posts on the community. So just following your career and being a part of that's been awesome, man. And then being in this group with the rest of the Titans is just an honor.
Yeah, it's well deserved, man. We will talk to you later. Thanks.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate it.
Do you want your message in front of the best ServiceNow admins, developers, architects, and product owners in the business? Want a conversation about your ServiceNow strategy and architecture? You can reach me via my website at www.theduke.digital. If you want to contribute to high-frequency, high-quality ServiceNow content, all you need to do is
feed the algorithm
with likes, shares, and comments. Thanks for watching.